In this video, I want to go back and take a quick look at what is called the bronchial tree. That is the branching of the airways of the lungs. We've already talked about the thyroid cartilage, so I'm going to forego that on this model. But I want to talk about the rings of the trachea and then the tracheal bifurcation. The trachea is really only about 4 inches long from the cricoid cartilage down to its bifurcation at the T4 vertebral level. We mentioned in the other video that we bifurcate into a left and a right primary bronchus. The left primary bronchus is more horizontal, the right is more vertical. Primary bronchi then divide into secondary bronchi, and secondary bronchi then branch into tertiary bronchi, also known as segmental bronchi. Now on this model, each of these color changes represents a segmental bronchus. However, they have in some areas kind of thrown a little loop on the model because this is a segmental bronchus and then they show it branching. Well, it does branch. It's going to branch approximately 20 more times, but not for the naming in this model. So depending on whether you're in A&P1 or A&P2 or human anatomy, we're going to look at these a little bit differently. In A&P1, you are just responsible for knowing that these are tertiary or segmental bronchi. Some books say that the left lung will be divided into 8 bronchopulmonary segments and the right lung into 10 bronchopulmonary segments, and a bronchopulmonary segment is fed by one of these segmental bronchi. Other books say that there are 10 in the left and 10 in the right. For our purposes, I'm going to go with 10 in the left lung and 10 in the right lung. As I said before, for A&P purposes, you only need to know that these are segmental or tertiary bronchi. For human anatomy, we may go a step further. So I want to describe the different bronchi, and the naming is actually quite simple, although the names are rather long. If we look at, I'm going to turn this just slightly so we get a better view. I'm going to look at the left lung first. Remember, the left lung has 2 lobes, a superior lobe and an inferior lobe, and each of those lobes is going to have 5 bronchopulmonary segments. So in the left lung, we see that this segmental bronchus is heading up toward the apex of the lung. We call that the apical bronchopulmonary segment, or the apical tertiary bronchus, or the apical segmental bronchus, depending on which terminology you want to use. I will use segmental bronchus. The apical segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the left lung. Now if I turn this to an anterior-posterior view, this comes toward the front of the lung. This is called the anterior segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the left lung. And if I rotate this a little bit, you can see there is one coming out of the posterior aspect, headed to the back of the lung. That is the posterior segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the left lung. Then we drop down a ways, and we can see there are 2 here. One is higher than the other. This is the superior segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the left lung. And this is the inferior segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the left lung. So those are the 5 bronchopulmonary segments, or segmental bronchi, of the superior lobe of the left lung. The inferior lobe of the left lung will also have 5. The first one is known as the superior segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the left lung. And on this model, we will have to rotate it around posteriorly because that superior segmental bronchus actually is exiting toward the back of this bronchial tree, toward the back of the bronchial tree. Then on this model, we come down further into this inferior lobe of the left lung, and we see here 2 segmental bronchi. The one closer to the midline is called the medial basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the left lung. The other is the anterior basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the left lung. This one here actually represents one segmental bronchus. This is called the lateral segmental, the lateral basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the left lung. And then this last one here represents the last, which is the posterior basal segmental bronchus of the left lung. So 5 segmental bronchi for the superior lobe and 5 segmental bronchi for the inferior lobe in the left lung. Let's look at the segmental bronchi for the right lung. Now keep in mind, we said there are still going to be 10 bronchopulmonary segments, so 10 segmental bronchi for the right lung, but we have 3 lobes to the right lung. So this is going to be a little bit different. On this model, this darker orange color represents the apical segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the right lung. The pink color coming toward the anterior is the anterior segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the left lung. And if I rotate the model slightly, we can see heading toward the posterior is the posterior segmental bronchus of the superior lobe of the right lung. So only 3 segmental bronchi in the superior lobe on the right lung. Then when we go to the middle lobe of the right lung, again we have to look at a posterior view. The superior segmental bronchus of the middle lobe of the right lung exits posteriorly from this bronchial tree. Then if we look at the other 2 remaining, we have a medial and a lateral segmental bronchus of the middle lobe of the right lung. A medial and a lateral segmental bronchus, the middle lobe of the right lung. So there were 3 segmental bronchi for the middle lobe of the right lung. Then we drop down to the inferior lobe of the right lung. We can see here in the somewhat green color the medial basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the right lung. And over here in this darker blue, we see the anterior basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the right lung. Immediately below that is the lateral basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the right lung. And at the very lowest, the posterior basal segmental bronchus of the inferior lobe of the right lung. Now initially these may not look anterior, medial, posterior, lateral, but remember if we put this in anatomical position it's more upright, and keep in mind that the bottom of the lungs are shaped to fit the dome shape of the diaphragm. So these lateral can go down further because the diaphragm is shaped such the middle aspect of the diaphragm is higher than the lateral aspect of the diaphragm. And the anterior aspect is higher than the posterior aspect. So the further down we go, the further lateral and posterior we can go. The very lowest we can get is the very back. The second lowest we can get is lateral. And then here, it's simple to tell anterior from medial. Although this one looks like it's coming anterior and this looks like it's coming anterior, it is closer to midline than the other. So this must be the medial, which leaves this to be the anterior. On the left lung, this must be the medial, which leaves this to be the anterior. So to recap quickly, right lung, 3 lobes. The superior lobe has 3 segmental bronchi. The middle lobe has 3 segmental bronchi, and the inferior lobe has 4 segmental bronchi for a total of 10.